going to be discussing a little bit more about the different types of shading. In our last lesson, we talked about shading and using a blending stump and basically using graphite to gently, real gently build up value, slowly and accurately. But there are lots of other ways to do shading. There's pointillism, which are tiny little dots, and you build them up from dark to light, light to dark, usually light to dark. And that's achieved through doing little dots in an area and building it up until it gets darker and darker and the dots overfill an area to make it appear dark. Okay, so this one right here is a good example of pointillism. Pointillism is not my favorite for sure, but a lot of people really enjoy pointillism, and it can be very soothing. And there's something about this kind of like a pounding of a paper that can be really calming for some people. So some people really enjoy pointillism. It is definitely, out of all the different shading types, and this not being extensive, it doesn't show everything, but these are just the ones that I think people use the most. Pointillism definitely, I think, takes the most patience. It's really close to lines as far as patience, but it still wins out. The next one is hatching. Hashing. I always write hatching. And cross hatching is basically where you use literally like a cross hatch or a hash tag that we see like this. And we use that in close conjunction with other little hash marks going back and forth. And really what it just means is you're making angular lines. Lines that build up at different angles and crisscross each other, and how close they are is how dark it looks. So think of a piece of fabric where there's strings that come up like this, and if they're closed together, the strings are closed together, you see less light through it, okay? So the pieces of thread, when they're closer together, you see less light. So it's the same type of thing when you're drawing. If you close those threads up in the areas where they crisscross, it's going to appear darker, and light will pop through, aka our paper, in areas where there is less cross hatching, okay? So next we're going to take a look at scribbling. Scribbling is exactly what you think it is. It's kind of like cross-hatching, but it's controlled chaos. So you're literally going around and scribbling in an area until it gets darker, okay? And scribbling can be a very chaotic type of shading technique, but it works super well for some people. And also it's a really good way for you to shade if you have shakier hands. It works very well. Then you have, of course, shading, regular shading like we discussed, which is a blending shade, okay? And that's going to be where you're going to take your graphite pencil and you're going to very gently, just in a kind of circular kind of motion like this, start to build up graphites from light to dark. And that's considered one of the easiest ways to make a very realistic type of blending. And it can be very time efficient if you use a blending stump. If not, it can be very slow. Then we have cross contour, and cross contour is kind of a strange animal. Cross contour shows you the shape of something. It shows the volume, which means the size, and it can show the depth of something, how it kind of caves in or indents or becomes concave. And then it can also show a convex shape, which is the difference between this is concave, this is convex. So see the difference? This feels like something's going into it. This feels like something's popping out. Okay, so it can show shapes, it can show volume, it can show direction, all these different things that we talk about in art simply by how we layer lines. If you look at this rose here, you can see that lines, as they come together, it becomes darker, but it's also giving the shape. The lines are also giving the shape, so they're doing two things. They're giving dimension, and they're also giving shading at the same time. And shading and dimension tend to be the same thing, which is a really interesting thing. Things that are inside of a whole area tend to be darker. And as they go away from us and the shapes kind of close in this way, it becomes darker anyway, just like the side of the rose right here. And then as they start to expound, they start to get bigger, start to grow, they become wider, the lines become farther apart. Okay, so cross contour is a really good exercise if you ever want to get into that. We're probably not going to touch on it on this drawing series, simply because I find that most people don't actually like doing it. But if you're trying to learn drawing and get better at things, it's a good exercise. And then the last one is lines. which is very similar to cross contour. Cross contour, well, this is contour lines, but cross contour lines are lines that actually cross each other like so. So when they become touching, they also give extra information. So a line gives you information. We talked about that before. But it's important to remember that the more lines you have that interact with each other, that also gives you information, okay? So when lines crisscross, that gives us more information about depth, more accurate information about space and shape. Now, when you do lines like this, ooh, that's a little tricky. I'm gonna bring this up a little bit closer to see if you can get up there. And you can actually look at your dollar bill, your $5 bill, your $10 bill, all your lower denomination bills, and they all have that kind of stamp on them that was originally done in line work, which is probably a carving, I'm assuming. And if you can see here, let me see if I can get a little bit closer there. Zoom in here. There you go. You can see that line work. And from far away, it just looks like shading, but it's actually these lines. And once again, it's about how close or far away those lines are, if we look at them, and how thick they are. So they tell a little bit about information about the shape of the line, because it wraps around a shape like a sphere, like around the nose, or how it kind of changes shape by the lips there. But it also gives us information about depth and about space. So those things can be transferred in lines. When we talk, lines are a universal language. So that being said, is this the only way to do it? Nope. There's lots of different ways out there. You might come up with your own way. You can also incorporate a variety of these different ones. There's nothing wrong with using any of these together with each other to shade something. It's really about what you want your artwork to look like when you're done. So I've drawn out some shapes here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to fast motion them through video here while I'm going ahead and shading. Now I have regular shading, which I just call shading, but really is kind of stump shading or gentle graphite building. There's line work, there's cross contour, there's pointillism, there's scribble, and there's hashing or hatching, whichever people like to call it. I always call it hashing. So when you're looking at these, please pay attention to the technique that I'm using. And remember, this is in quick time. I will stop and give you a couple of techniques afterwards. In this next section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to also speed draw this for you. And each section, I've taken a gentle shape outline of a hand, and I'm going to go ahead and shade each section in only what's available there in that box. So this whole section here, this box will be lines, this will be scribble, this will be shading only, This will be cross contour, hashing, pointillism, and then contour, regular contouring. So go ahead and watch as I go ahead and develop this drawing in quick time here. If you're at home right now, what I would like for you to do is to practice doing some of these shadings types on different objects or different shapes that we've discussed before in 3-dimension. Go ahead and give it a try. Give yourself a sphere, some cubes, some rectangular cubes, some pyramids, some cones, whatever you want. Go ahead and give it a try. If you want to try something in your environment, like a glass or something like that, you can do that as well. But these are shapes that I prefer for you to start out with because they're nice, easy beginner shapes.